before we get started with this video, I now sell merchandise. So if you're interested in buying a t-shirt or a mug, I have a link to my store in the description. I really appreciate anybody that purchases any one of my products.
Guys, it's your boy Jermaine from Shovelnosehogs back with another video, and today we're going to do an update on my morph guide, and we're going to specifically talk about the albino gene in western hognose snakes. So let's get started. So first off, the albino is a recessive morph or gene. It's probably the most common one that's found in hognose snakes as well as most other species of snakes. And they have quite a bit of variety with just a regular albino. You have some that more of an orange color. You have some that are red, and you have some that are yellow. And before I start going over the combinations between albinos and other recessive genes, I want to talk about the two incomplete dominant genes that we know of in hognose snakes and what they look like when combined with the albino gene. So we're going to be talking about the conda gene as well as the arctic. As you can see on the top left and right, we have examples of what a conda and superconda hognose looks like. And I talked to Brent Bumgardner at the Daytona Reptile Expo this year, and he's the one that discovered the conda gene, and he wanted me to let everybody know that it is called conda and superconda. It's not called anaconda or super anaconda. And in terms of superconda, it's all one word. And then at the bottom, we have the Arctic gene as well as an example of what a super Arctic looks like on the bottom right hand, which is actually a super Arctic conda. That was discovered by Jeff Galwood. So now let's look at what these genes, these incomplete dominant genes, look like when combined with albino. So first we're going to discuss the condas. On the left-hand side, we have the albino conda. And then on the right, we have the albino superconda. And conda basically affects the pattern. It reduces the amount of saddles when you just have one copy of the conda gene. As you can see, when you compare it to a regular hognose, it has a lot less saddles or a lot less spots. And then the superconda version completely removes the pattern except for the head stamp. And here are some examples of Arctic albinos. We have just a regular Arctic albino on the left-hand side. The Arctic gene lightens up the background a lot, and it usually outlines the saddles or the spots, making them pop more. And then in the middle, we have an Arctic albino conda, so including the other incomplete dominant, the conda gene. And then all the way on the right-hand side, we have the Arctic albino superconda. And next we have the super Arctic albinos. On the left, we just have a regular super Arctic albino. Then we have a super Arctic albino conda, and then we have a super Arctic superconda albino. So that basically covers both of the incomplete dominants, the conda as well as the Arctic, showing you what they look like in the heterozygous version as well as the homozygous version. All right, so next let's start talking about some morph combinations when we include albino with another recessive. The first one we're going to be talking about is what happens when you visually combine an albino and xanthic. And before I go on, this video is just to show you what the animals look like when both of the recessives are visually shown. So if you have an albino and you breed to an xanthic, I'm not saying that that's going to produce this outcome that I'm going to show you, because a lot of times it's just going to produce hets. So both of the animals have to carry both of the genes. So we're just going to act like they do. So when you combine albino and xanthic, you get a snow. So we have examples of a snow conda, which is called a yeti, and then a snow superconda, which is called a super yeti. And now adding the Arctic gene, I have an example of an Arctic snow. And then we have an Arctic superconda snow that's hatching right out the egg. And let's go a step further. And we have the super Arctic snow, also called the avalanche. And then in the middle, we have the super Arctic snow conda. And then we have the super Arctic snow superconda. So these genes right here, or this combination, is pretty new to the hobby. Not too many people actually have super Arctic snows. All right, next up, we're gonna combine the albino gene with the caramel gene. So the caramel is a T plus albino, and you really notice that it has a reduced head pattern. So when you combine the albino and the caramel gene, you get what's called an ultramel. So I have an example of just what it looks like. Also the conda version and the super conda version. And this is what it looks like when you add the Arctic gene. So we have the Arctic caramel albino, and then we have an Arctic conda. Yeah, we have an Arctic caramel albino conda. Really cool combination right there. You can definitely see the influence of the Arctic. Next up, we're going to combine the albino plus sable. So sable is one of the melanistic genes that we have in hognose snakes. So it produces a really dark hognose, and it varies. Some of them are more of a reddish color, some of them more of a greenish color, but basically sable is going to produce a dark hognose. So when you make this combination, you produce one of my favorite morph combinations called the Sunburst. So I have an example of Sunburst. This was my hognose Cheeto that passed away a couple years ago. Then in the middle we have the Sunburst with the conda, and then we have the super conda version of it. Next, let's add the Arctic gene to the Sunburst. So we have examples of the Arctic Sunburst conda, and the Arctic Sunburst super conda. And I really like what the Arctic does to the saddles of some of the sunbursts. Sometimes they have like that nice yellow color. And I think the Arctic sunburst is one of the most unique combinations in hognose snakes. And you get a lot of variety on what they look like. And here's some examples of when you have a super Arctic sunburst. Takes away a lot of the oranges, and you're kind of left with a pink color snake. So we have a super Arctic sunburst as well as a super Arctic sunburst conda. And when they're born, you can barely see the saddles. All right, next up, we're gonna mix the albino with the lavender gene. So lavender gene is basically purple hognose, another T plus albino. And this combination is called a coral. So you can see examples of the coral, coral conda, and coral super conda. All right, and here example on the left-hand side, we have an Arctic coral, and then we have a super Arctic coral. So I'm pretty sure that they have super Arctic coral condas, and I think somebody's produced a super Arctic super conda coral. Just don't have any pictures of it, but you kind of get the idea. Next, we're going to combine the albino with the leucistic morph. So the leucistic produces an all-white snake, takes away all color, and it's not really much you can do with the leucistic gene, but albino does have an influence. So when you combine these two together, you produce an all-white snake. They are pink when they're babies, but the albino influences their eye color. So you'll get an all-white snake with red eyes. All right, next we're going to combine albino with another albino, another T negative albino, pink pastel albino. So these are two different recessive genes. And so when you combine these two together, you get what's called an electric. So we have an electric conda, and we have an Arctic electric. Now I couldn't find a super Arctic electric. I'm pretty sure that has been made, but I just couldn't find a picture of it, and I couldn't really tell if it's actually been produced. But I feel like I've seen it before. But these are some of the varieties of electric that we have. Not too many people work with the electric project. Next up, we're going to combine the albino gene with toffee belly. So as you can see in this picture of the toffee belly, it looks very similar to the caramel gene in terms of color, but this one has a purple belly. And albino and toffee is called a toffee glow. So I have examples of just a regular toffee glow conda, and a toffee glow super conda. And next up, we have the albino with another and a newer melanistic morph and hognose snakes called the Swiss chocolate. So let's see what happens when we mix these two together. We get an albino Swiss, also called a Swiss tangerine chocolate. So very similar to the Sunburst, but as you can see, it does give you a different look. So this gene right here is going to be really popular in the next few years. The Swiss chocolate is, and combine the Swiss chocolate with a lot of things. But you can see it's pretty interesting when you combine it with albino. Like I said, it's very similar to the Sunburst, but you can definitely tell the difference if you go back and look at the Sunburst morph. All right, so wrapping up this video, let's look at some of the albino morph combinations when they're combined with two or more recessives. So we're going to look at the albino when you add the caramel gene as well as the Evans hypo gene. When you do that, you get what's called an albino frost. So this was produced by Jason Taylor. And the last morph combination I'm going to show on this presentation is what happens when you combine an albino, sable, and xanthic. And so this is a fairly new morph combo. And what you get is called a snowburst, originally produced by Dan Eby. So that's going to be it for this video. I'm pretty sure I left off some things. It's kind of hard to gather up all the morphs that are out right now. One morph combination I didn't include in this PowerPoint was the albino mixed with Evans hypo. I just really couldn't find that many pictures of them. And the pictures that I did find, I couldn't tell if it was just an Evans hypo or just an albino. But it does exist. And so, yeah, so hopefully this um, kind of gives some clarification on where we've come in terms of morph combinations in the albino snakes. And I'll see y'all for the next morph showcase. Peace out, guys.
And I now have a Patreon account for those who want to support me even further. Here you will have access to exclusive videos, giveaways, as well as discounts. The link will be in the bottom in the description. And if you purchase Reppy links, feel free to use the discount code shovelnosehogs to receive 5% off of all purchases.